Namaskaram. Hello everyone. This video has been created to support students who are learning directly from me as well as those who use my vidhyaadhaanam project to learn compositions. Over the years, I have published many video lessons along with accompanying notations, and I wanted to take a few minutes to explain how to read those notations, especially the lyrics and their pronunciation. Representing Indian languages in English has always been a challenging task for me. Many sounds that exist in Indian languages do not have direct equivalents in English. We need ways to distinguish between Alpa Prana and Mahaprana consonants, short and long vowels, and subtle pronunciation differences such as ka versus ka or ka versus ka. And this challenge becomes even more apparent when teaching students who cannot read or write an Indian script and rely entirely on English transliteration. Most compositions that we learn are in Sanskrit, Telugu, Tamil, Malayalam, Hindi, or even other Indian languages. And at some point, the lyrics need to be represented using the English alphabet. And in my experience teaching students abroad, especially in the United States, I have noticed that many children approach written text primarily through the English phonetics. And they learn to read fluently at a very young age using the phonetic rules and naturally apply those same rules when reading transliterated Indian lyrics. And this often leads to pronunciations that differ from the intended sound. For example, even if I write a syllable in the uppercase to follow a conventional transliteration style, da for example, if I write it in uppercase, I would want to read it as da. But many students still read it according to the English phonetics rather than the sound intended in the original language. This distinction may seem obvious to someone familiar with Indian languages and who are very familiar with the conventional notation scheme, but it is not always intuitive for learners whose primary reading experience is in English. And to address this, I have developed a notation approach that has worked very well for my students over the years, and this video is intended to provide additional context and explain how I personally interpret and represent various sounds when writing the lyrics in English, and especially when I want to teach and pass it on to my students. There are, of course, several well-established transliteration systems already in use. My goal here is not to replace them, but rather to share a practical approach that has worked for me, that I have found effective, particularly for students who are more comfortable reading the Latin alphabets than any Indian script. And for the examples in this video, I will primarily use the Devanagari script as a reference. However, the same principles can be extended to many Indian languages, Telugu, Tamil, Kannada, or anything else that share similar phonetic characteristics. So, with that background, let us look at a simple example and see how I represent these sounds in my notations. And hopefully that will help you understand why I write notations or lyrics in a certain way. And this is purely my personal approach. I like to do this. I like to use this approach to teach my students. I'm not saying this is right or this is the only practical approach. This just works for me and I like it. I hope you find this useful. Thank you. Ka, I typically write it as Ka. Kha is Mahaprana. It's actually Mahaprana. So I write it as Kha with a number 2 above that syllable. Ga, I write it as Ga. Gha, I write it as Ga again, but with the number 2. So which tells students when they read this, Ka is Ka. Kha, when they see the number 2, they kind of emphasize that Ka and give that enunciation needed as Kha. Ga, and again, when I write GA with the number 2, they give some enunciation there as Gha. Same, another example would be Ta. THA is Ta. When I write the number 2, Th. And then Da, when I write it as DHA. Now, when I add a number 2 above the DHA, they have to read it as Dha. They kind of emphasize that a little more. Okay. and this is purely based on the phonetic system that exists for English. So students in the US, they are used to going by the sound of the syllable. So when you say A, they first learn it as A. When you say B, they learn it as B. When you say C, they learn it as K. Okay, they start like that. So when you write something like TA, naturally they have a tendency to read it as ta. So when I write the number 2 in above that TA, that means it is the next one. It has to be enunciated as ta. Da is the simple DA is da. Now when I write the number 2 above DA, it is da. The Mahaprana takes over there. So somebody asked me, then how would you write ta? I would write it as THA, ta. Now THA with the number 2 is th. DHA is da. DHA with the number 2 is dha. Okay. So if I were to write the longer syllables, instead of ka, if I want to write ka, I would write it as KAA. Okay, because that is easy for people who are only used to English. That's easy for them to read. Again, ka, 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 ga, gha. That number 2 above that says that distinguishes whether it is alpa prana or mahaprana. Same thing with another example. Ta will be THAA, ta. Tha, a number 2 there will say it needs to be enunciated. It is the mahaprana. Tha, da is DHAA. Now when I write the number 2 above that, it's dha. Okay, same way. Instead of, if I say ta, it is simple, TAA. Now if I want to do the mahaprana, tha, then I put the number 2, tha. Da is DAA. Dha, DAA with the number 2 is dha. So this is how I have been writing lyrics for students who can only read English. They do not understand Devanagari, they do not understand Indian languages, they do not understand the variations like Alpa Prana, Mahaprana, short syllables, long syllables and all that. So to keep it simple for them, I have followed the same phonetic system that English follows, and I have typically written lyrics in this format. Many have in the past asked me why I am not following the typical convention. I really felt when I used to give them notations in the traditional format, and when I wrote it as capital DA, I thought they should sing it as DHA, they should read it as da. However, students never read it as da, they always read it as da. So I write it this way so students learning from this side of the globe are absolutely clear about the pronunciation. So I just wanted to clarify that for the benefit of those who are reading my notations, because many have returned to me asking why I am not following the traditional system. Sometimes we need to reinvent ourselves to help people who don't know our languages. My goal is to support those who can only purely read English, which is the vast majority of students learning from me. In just my way of interpreting things, so I can teach students who don't know Indian languages the right way to pronounce things to the best of my ability. This is also something that I am figuring out as I evolve as a teacher. So I hope that answers or clarifies some of the questions people have had when they reached out to me directly or through emails. Thank you for your time.